Hello marketer, it's Ty here bringing you another episode of Lean Mean Marketing Teams. It's my pleasure today to introduce you to Josh Steimle, entrepreneur, author and speaker. Josh has written over 300 articles for the likes of Forbes and Entrepreneur magazine. He's been a TEDx speaker and he's the author of the book Chief Marketing Officers at Work, where Josh interviewed 30 leading CMOs from companies like PayPal, Target, Zendesk, GE and Nestle. Josh is also the founder of MWI, a marketing agency he founded back in 1999, as well as a research assistant at Harvard Business School and the founder and CEO of 7 Systems. The topic of today's episode is how CMOs can build influence and leverage it to make good things happen. Now, as a CMO or marketing leader, we'll all recognize the importance of influence. Every day we need to influence our CEO, the board, our direct reports, our team, or other key internal stakeholders. If we're looking to continue to excel in our careers, and we might also be looking to increase our level of influence in our industry by being recognized as a speaker or a thought leader. But influence isn't necessarily something we're specifically taught in our marketing degree or undergraduate studies. So that's why I think today's episode is so useful for you, as Josh has developed the 7 systems of influence that he shares with us on the show. Starting with vision and ending with love, the 7 systems gives you a methodology that you can apply to increase your ability to influence others at work or to build the external profile you need to propel your career further. We also start the show by talking about Josh's book, Chief Marketing Officers at Work, and discuss the changing remit of CMOs and the makeup of a modern, influential marketing leader. There's a lot covered in this episode, as always, so don't forget to grab the notes so you can take action on what you hear today. Just head to growthgenerators.io, look out for this episode with Josh Steimle, and download the notes. Enjoy the show.
Welcome to Lean Mean Marketing Teams with Ty Hayes, where you'll hear from CMOs, authors and experts at the top of their game to learn how to create a modern, high-performance marketing team. If you enjoy this episode, please remember to hit subscribe so that you can be the first in line to hear each new episode as it drops. Now, let's get into the show.
Josh Steimle, entrepreneur, author and speaker. Welcome to the Lean Mean Marketing Teams podcast.
Thank you, Ty. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm thrilled to have you on. You've got a fascinating background with all those things mentioned. Obviously, very successful entrepreneur with multiple businesses. You've written books and hundreds of articles and been a TEDx speaker. Today, we're going to talk about how CMOs can build their influence. So maybe to kick things off, can you just give us a brief summary of your career to date?
Well, the brief version is I started a marketing agency in 1999 in Provo, Utah, called MWI. And that business failed its way forward for about 13 years. We did well enough to keep on going, but it was never doing well enough to call it a success. And in 2013, everything changed for me. 1, I brought on a partner. 2, I got the opportunity to write for Forbes magazine. And writing for Forbes changed my whole life. It changed everything, the business, everything. Once I started writing for Forbes, suddenly people cared what I was saying because of that brand. And writing for Forbes led to writing for other publications. It led to speaking at TEDx. It led to other speaking engagements. It led to my book deal. And that exposure and attention that was generated from that content going out everywhere generated over $10 million in revenue for my agency and allowed us to grow internationally and establish offices in Asia. And so now that's what I'm helping other people to do, is to grow their influence and leverage it to make the impact they want to see, whether it's in their business or growing a business if they're an entrepreneur, or in their personal lives.
Fantastic. I think given our audience, chief marketing officers and VPs of marketing, they need to be influential, both externally in terms of building their brand to attract high quality talent, where we are in a bit of a war for talent. And internally, I think the role of the CMO has to influence so many other parts of the business to get campaigns through, to get agreement on that, to actually, work on product and bring those customer insights to bear. So love today to unpack. I know you've kind of codified your learning into the 7 systems of influence. So really looking forward to digging into that and maybe looking at how CMOs can build that external influence and maybe apply it internally as well if they're looking to build influence internally. But before that, interestingly, I recently read your book, Chief Marketing Officers at work, which was written a little while ago. I think so much of the content was still relevant. 30 leading CMOs that you interviewed, asked them really pointed questions around how they were leading their team, what their role was, what their remit was, the capabilities they were building. I'd love if we briefly touch on that, maybe share with us what were the patterns and themes that emerged during that research.
One of the most interesting patterns, or anti-patterns, I guess you could call it, was that none of these CMOs seemed to have a traditional marketing background, or rather, most of them didn't. I think one or two studied marketing in school, and the rest of them did all sorts of different things to get to that chief marketing officer position. And so that was an interesting pattern, that there wasn't a pattern there, that it was literally, in some cases, it was somebody, when they were first hired at a company, somebody said, "Hey, who knows how to build a website?" And somebody raised their hand and said, "I know how to build a website." And then 15 years later, they're the CMO of that company because of that small decision. And so there are all these random paths that people had to get into the CMO position. And that was pretty interesting to me, because a lot of younger people, students and such, are saying, "How do I become the CMO someday?" And the answer is, well, volunteer to do the website maybe, but really there is no traditional path to that office.
Yeah. Definitely one of the themes I picked up, and I think that mix of engineering and technical backgrounds. And I think it was the Audible Chief Product and Marketing Officer, which I thought was an interesting title in itself, kind of shows that importance of having a really close understanding of the product and marketing and how those two areas need to work together. But yeah, I think it was Louis Gagnon was saying the deep quant experience being so important for marketers going forward, and he thought that would be really important with the rise of data and that understanding of the customer and the product, and was talking about the rising prominence of the CMO given the access to data now, almost superseding the CFO, which used to be one of the most important execs around the table, but seeing these CMOs rise to prominence. And do you think that trends continued given COVID and the companies needing to become even more customer centric and transform the business?
Well, what's interesting that you bring up here is that the CMO does have to do a lot of things, and the CMO is one of the most important roles in a company. Now, every year there's an article or 2 or 10 that come out and say, is this the end of the CMO role or something? But regardless of what that role is called, there's always somebody who needs to fill that role. And what's interesting about the CMO role is that it's the only C-suite position that shares the goal of growth with the CEO. Ultimately, the CEO is responsible for everything, right? But usually the CEO's primary goal is growth. And that's also the primary role of the CMO. Nobody else has that. That's not the role of the CTO or CFO to grow the company, but that is the CMO's express responsibility. And so you often see that CMOs are becoming the new CEOs because they understand that role of growth. And I saw that as a trend while writing the book, but you still see it to this day, that somebody has to help the CEO with that responsibility.
Yeah, and you've seen chief growth officers and chief revenue officers making that link even more closely now. And I think it was Heather Zinzak, the Domo CMO at the time, she was talking about the importance of CMOs to be an executive first and see themselves as that and look at how they can grow the entire business, as also wearing the sales hat and partnering with sales. I think that's becoming increasingly important. I think she made a quote something like, if sales isn't successful, then marketing is not successful. And she really got under the hood and was looking at comp plans and sales strategies. And yeah, I think that was another observation of a trend I think may continue. And Kevin Marasco of Highview CMO at the time was talking about that importance of agility and test and learn. And I think past 12 months has taught us anything that will be a continuing trend. So yeah, fascinating book. How did you enjoy the experience of interviewing that many high-profile CMOs?
It was a great experience, and it was a terrible experience.
Yeah.
The great
Wow.
part of it was actually doing the interviews, sitting down and
Yeah.
talking to these people, getting to ask them the questions I wanted to ask from GE and Spotify and PayPal. I mean, these are my marketing heroes, and
Yeah.
I'm getting to ask them literally anything I want for an hour.
Yeah.
That's a pretty rare opportunity. On the
Yeah.
other hand, it was really hard to get these meetings with these CMOs, and it was hard to get them to show up once the meetings
Yeah.
were scheduled. I had one CMO who canceled on me 10 times,
Wow.
twice while we were in the middle of the interview. And
Wow.
then we never even got her interview done. So
Yeah.
it was It was
Yeah.
really hard to chase down some of these CMOs and get their time, but
Yeah.
once it was done, it was, wow, what an amazing experience. I
Mm.
learned so much from it.
Yeah. And I think you mentioned as well that by the time the book was finished, quite a few of the people had moved on from the positions as well, given the high turnover within within the CMO gig.
Yeah,
So
that's kind of a trend in the CMO position too. I think
yeah.
the average time, I'm a little rusty on this data, but it's something like 18 months is the average length of time a CMO stays in their position at any given company.
Yeah.
And I think fully a third of the CMOs I interviewed were in different positions by the time the book was published. And I
Yeah.
wasn't that slow on publishing the book.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, the nature of the beast. But like I say, I think a lot of it's still relevant around the data centricity and the importance of CMOs to understand data, putting the customer first, this close partnership and understanding, deep understanding of the product, coming from different backgrounds, alignment with sales, all really relevant stuff. I think maybe the one trend which I've noticed, a recent Gartner report looking at the most important capabilities to build, I think in 2020 was, brand strategies kind of risen up above marketing analytics and marketing ops. So I think something about COVID and perhaps the focus on short-termism leading up to that. And now a lot of companies realizing, wow, if we're going to differentiate, we really need to get back into building a strong brand and a distinctive brand. Would you agree with that? Any other observations you've made on any changes since the book was launched?
Certainly, brand is paramount because people make purchasing decisions on emotion. We all like to think that we don't. We like to think that we analyze the data and we look at the details and we buy the best product out there, but everybody uses emotion to make purchasing decisions, and branding is what connects people to a product through that emotional link. And so brand becomes really the end all be all because we can all build products. And as AI and data and all this stuff gets out there, it's hard to hide anything anymore. I mean, I lived in China for a while, and so I saw the manufacturing process firsthand out there. I saw that innovative products were going up on Kickstarter to build. And by the time that product was funded on Kickstarter, somebody in China was already manufacturing that product and distributing it, ripping it off. And so when you can create any product that quickly and do it that well, what have you got left to differentiate yourself with? Brand. That's it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, excellent, Josh. Well, congrats again on that book. And like I say, lots of relevant findings still in there. If anyone hasn't read it, check it out. The link will be in the show notes. Josh, so you touched on it at the beginning, but yeah, fantastic story in terms of how you build your influence and kind of parlayed your experience with the different publishers into speaking, into authorship, and how that helped your business take off. You've codified that into the 7 systems of influence. Love to dig into that. But before we do, perhaps influence can have different meanings. What definition do you use to describe influence?
I use influence not the way that we tend to with YouTube influencers and the people on Instagram and the kids doing crazy stuff. I'm not talking about that kind of influence. I'm talking about the more dictionary definition of influence, that each of us impacts those around us through everything that we do, whether it's a video we create or an article we write or just our example, the things we do and say on an everyday basis. We are all influencing everybody we come in contact with. The only question is how much and in what way.
Yeah, makes sense. So why do you think it's important then for chief marketing officers, VPs of marketing to increase their influence?
Because they want to get things done. We all want to get things done. The CMO has to get buy-in from the CEO, from the rest of the C-suite, from their own marketing team, and they want to lead their teams effectively. And that means they need influence. And it's not enough to just know everything. We often say that knowledge is power, but knowledge isn't power. You can know everything, but you can't get anything done without influencing other people. For those watching the video, I've got a lot of books behind me on my shelf, and I read a ton of books. I read over 100 books a year. But if I just read those books, I might know a lot, but if I can't apply that to the real world, then I'm not benefiting from those books. I'm not getting anything done. And that's where influence comes in. And influence comes down to a lot of things. It comes down to things we call like charisma or eye contact, or how we speak and intonation and how we write. I mean, it's literally everything we do that people see this all adds up to the influence that we have, and the influence we have creates the impact that we make in the
Mm,
world.
mm, brilliant. Excellent. Well, then why don't we get into it? So these 7 systems, and like we talked about, useful for many reasons, as you mentioned, and the CMO to either build their external reputation or their internal reputation, and how to motivate and influence their stakeholders. So 7 systems. It starts with system 1, vision. So tell me what is meant by this and why this is a starting point.
So Stephen R. Covey, author of 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, said that all things are created twice. We create things first in our mind, and then we create them in the real world. And that's what vision is all about. It's about having an idea of what we want to accomplish, and then we set out to turn that vision into reality. And so the vision could be something smaller, it could be something big. Your vision might be, I want to become the CEO of this company in 5 years. That's a big vision. That's a big deal, right?
Hmm.
Or it might be, I need to get my 10-year-old to take out the trash today. That's still a vision. It's a smaller thing. It's more
Yeah.
short term, but
Yeah.
something that you want to get done. So the first step in creating influence is having a clear vision of what you want to accomplish.
Hmm. It makes sense. Like with a lot of the consulting I do, one of the things to get the team going is to set the vision. Where's this team want to go? What's the North Star metric or the end goal? And there's a lot of mission-based companies now, and people I think are more attracted to purpose. And when they're working, they want to be motivated by something and know they're contributing to something larger than themselves. So I think it makes sense to have that vision, and how you apply that for your own influence personally or for your team is really important. The system 2 then is about genius zone. So tell us, how do you combine expert zones to kind of create your superpower?
So the genius zone, you create this by overlapping expert zones that you have. We all have a lot of expert zones. We might have hundreds of things that we're halfway good at. Expert zone doesn't mean that you're the best at it. It just means that it's something that you can do. And it might also be not just a skill, but it might be something from your background, something from your experience. For example, I grew up in Los Angeles, and I've also lived in Brazil and China and Hong Kong. And so that's part of my genius zone, or part of my expert zones, just that experience of living in those places. It's not that I am the expert on living in China. I only lived there for 2 years. But compared to somebody who's never lived there, I'm an expert. I know what it's like to live there. I can get around. I can get a car. I can order food in restaurants. So compared to somebody who knows nothing, I'm an expert. So if I were making a huge list of my expert zones, I would put literally everything down that I could think of that makes me who I am: skills, talents, background, experience. And then we start looking for interesting overlaps with those expert zones that give us superpowers, that allow us to do things that nobody else can do. So, for example, I grew up skateboarding, and I ran a skate shop when I was a kid. So I used to sell stuff. I've been in the industry, I've worked in the industry. I still know people in that industry, and I still skateboard. And now my 11-year-old son skateboards with me. So I know a bit about skateboarding, but by itself, that doesn't make me very special. There are tons of other people out there who know just as much as I do about skateboarding, but that's one of my expert zones. Another one of my expert zones, of course, is marketing. I've run a marketing agency for 20 years. I wrote a book interviewing these 30 CMOs. I've taught marketing. I've lived and breathed marketing for the past 20 years. By itself, that still doesn't make me very special, though, because there's so many other marketers out there. There's so many other marketing agency owners out there. So by itself, that's not special either. But as soon as I overlap those two areas and I ask, how many people know as much about skateboarding as I do and know as much about marketing as I do, now that puts me in a really rare group, because how many marketing agency owners are also active skateboarders? How many skateboarders own marketing agencies? Not that many. And so if I overlap those two things, and maybe I throw in another 2 or 3 things into my genius zone there, if I put that together, then I could go to an Adidas or a Nike and say, hey, I can help you to sell a lot of shoes to skateboarding kids. And there are 10 million of those kids in the US alone. So that's a way that I could leverage that genius zone to get into a high paying position at one of these companies. Now, I haven't chosen to make that my genius zone. We all have a lot of expert zones, but we also all have a lot of genius zones that we can choose from. That's a great thing about today, is that we have so many options and so many choices. It can even make it hard to choose what we do. But if we find one of those genius zones and we say, you know what, this is my mission, this is my passion, this is what I want to do, and I can do this better than anybody else because of this overlap of experiences and skills and knowledge that I have,
Mm,
that's a genius zone that we can take, and we can make a lot of money with it. We can build a
mm,
great career with it,
mm,
but we also can make a great impact in the world with it.
mm, mm. Yeah, it makes sense. It reminds me of other Venn diagrams I've seen around, passion, skills, and what the market's willing to pay for. And I think there's another hedgehog theory which builds on that, and some other Japanese terms that are similar. And it also reminds me of, I guess, positioning. Firms need to find that positioning and what makes them unique. And this lens of just looking at different expert zones kind of overlaps there. And then lastly, Rob Goffey, who we've had on the show before, he talks about authenticity and bringing your authenticity to work. And he would talk about examples of what makes a person unique, and it might be their background, their heritage, or system 3, audience. So we've got our vision, we know what our genius zone is. So next system is audience. Tell us about that.
So the mistake that a lot of us make when we think about audience is we ask the question, who is everybody who might be interested in what I've got? Whatever I'm selling, whatever I'm producing, I want to go after everybody. I want to go after anybody who's least bit interested in this. But that's a mistake. And most marketers know this, of course. We talk about target audience, and we have buyer personas, and we talk about niching down and really finding that core audience. So a lot of marketers out there, they get this. There are a lot of entrepreneurs, however, who don't get this. And it's a struggle for them to realize that, as they say, it's cliche, the riches are in the niches. But it's true. That's how you connect with a core audience, is by getting very focused on who they are. So when I lead people through the exercise of figuring out who their ideal audience is, it's kind of similar to the genius zone. We make a list of everything that might be relevant in terms of characteristics, background, experience, location, anything that might make somebody part of our ideal audience. And then we start looking for the relevant overlaps. And we ask questions like, well, would you rather sell to somebody who's going to buy once, or somebody who's going to buy several times? Would you rather sell to somebody who has money or has no money? Would you rather be selling to somebody who's near you or not near you? Some products are limited by geography. And so we ask a lot of these questions to figure out, who do you really want to be selling to? Because we don't want to just sell to anybody. We want to sell to the people who are ready to go, who are easy to sell to, who are going to become repeat customers. And when we start boiling that down, we can get a very targeted profile. And once we have that profile, we can create content for that person that speaks to them, that triggers them, that gets their attention, and makes them say, wow, this person is talking directly to me. They know who I am. It's like they're inside my head. That's the point that we want to get to with the ideal audience.
And I think thinking about the internal perspective here for a CMO or marketing VP, is it the case of thinking about all the different stakeholders that you need to influence? Whether it's the CFO, the CEO, the CIO, all of the different executives you need to influence, and then their teams, and almost doing an empathy map or a persona for each of those, and going, well, what are the pains and gains for this target audience? What do they care about? How much influence do they have? How much power do they have? How much information do they need? Do I need to consult or just inform? Is that how this could be applied kind of internally, almost doing a stakeholder map of everyone you need to influence?
Yes, that's where it gets fun, because when it comes to our customers, we can kind of pick and choose. We can say, this is my ideal customer, and I'm going to choose these attributes for my ideal customer. Well, if you're the CMO trying to influence the CEO, your ideal audience in that case is the CEO that you've got. You don't get to pick and choose who the CEO is. So you already know who your ideal audience is, and you have to adapt the 7 systems to target that person that you've already got in front of you. It's the same with parents. If you're a parent, your ideal audience is your kids, and you don't really get to choose them or mold them all that much. They come as who they are, and you've got to deal with that. The ideal audience, going through that exercise, when you already know exactly who that person is, then the focus is on, okay, well, who is this person? and what are the different attributes that I can really work with that fit with my genius zone? Because you'll see that there's a link between your genius zone and your ideal audience where you say, if my genius zone gives me this superpower, then what is it about my ideal audience that allows me to use that superpower to influence them best? Simple example might be you figure out that your CEO responds better to email than they respond to voicemails or texts or phone calls. They like reading. That's how they process mentally. Well, if you know that that's how they process information best, then you're going to customize your approach to send them more email and not do as many pop-ins or in-person visits because you know that that's how you get things done. That's how you influence them.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think that's a nice segue into system 4, which is about content. So we know how our audience is and what their needs might be, but now it's about, I guess, message and channel. So yeah, tell us more about content. Is this about a content plan that kind of captures different content pillars that aligns to your genius zone, or what's involved in this stage?
Right. So the content, system number 4, is all about how do I create the content that will influence my audience so that they take action that turns my vision into reality. That's how these first 4 systems are connecting. And content, as you mentioned, is 2 things. It's message and channel. It's what are you saying and how are you delivering it? And when it comes to message, there's a great book that just came out by Brendan Kane called Hook Point. And this book is all about how do you get that attention within the first 3 seconds? What's the initial hook that gets somebody to pay attention to the rest of what you have to say? Because if you don't get those first 3 seconds, you don't get to say anything else. And so that first hook, that's part of your message. What comes next, that's part of your message. The longer form is part of your message. So I'm an author and I help people write books. And so I like to talk about books a lot. Well, a book is 100 pages, 200 pages, 500 pages. That's a lot of content, but it's still, that's part of your message. Your message is everything that you're putting out there. And like I mentioned earlier, it might not be writing or speaking. It might be your example, it might just be what you do in certain situations. That can also be your content and the message that you're getting out there. Now, as far as the channel, how we deliver it, the big question is, where is your audience hanging out? So I gave you the example of the CEO. Maybe your CEO likes to hang out in email. Well, that's where you need to deliver your content then. Maybe your audience is on YouTube or Instagram, or they're reading Forbes. Wherever they're hanging out, that's where you have to go. When I started writing for Forbes, I had an article that this single article literally generated millions of dollars for my agency. And I thought, well, gee, this article worked so well on Forbes. I should copy this article and I should put it on Entrepreneur Magazine and in Inc. and all these other publications that I have access to. And so that's what I did. I mean, I didn't copy the article word for word, but I copied the basic idea and then I customized it so that it was different enough. But I published that article in these other places and nothing happened. I mean, nothing, not a single lead, not a peep. And I thought about that and I realized, I guess my audience is not hanging out on these other publications. They're hanging out on Forbes, but they're not reading Entrepreneur. They're not reading Inc. They're not reading these other publications. So when it comes to content, you've got to choose the right channel. And if you're not getting any response, it might be that you have a great message. It's just in the wrong channel.
Mm. Again, I think for the internal perspective, I always remember when I was a CMO thinking about all those different channels that were available, and some are committee meetings, when you're in committee with other executives, there's project meetings, planning days, there's one-to-ones, there's team meetings, there's Slack, there's internal newsletters, there's email. There are actually so many communication channels available, and I think it's recognizing that people respond differently to different channels and not having a one-channel strategy. I guess it's just considering that omni-channel approach. And if you're going to build influence, or your team is going to build influence, thinking about, well, yeah, which committees does my team need to be on talking to, and where am I going to have a presence to build my influence, and how can I get the right seats at the right tables and present the right content to have the influence that I need?
Or to take it a step further, it's about providing the right content for the right situation in the right channel. Because when you're sending out a notice saying, hey, this is our new strategic direction, one channel might work well for that. But if you're going to give an employee individualized feedback, maybe that's a different channel than the other one. You might send one message out by email. You might send a different message out, one on one in a face-to-face meeting, because that's the way that type of content needs to be delivered.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think just almost thinking about those comms and developing an internal content plan or influence plan with the cadence that you're going to do this can be really powerful, allowing the informal and the formal and just having some structures to how you're going to grow that influence. So system 5 then, action. So CMOs are busy people, and I think we've all heard of the kind of knowing doing gap where we know what we should be doing but other priorities emerge. So how do we overcome that, and what's this system 5 all about?
So system number 5, or action, it is just about how are you going to get this done? What's your plan? And that plan might be really simple. Maybe you just have a Post-it note and you write down, this is what I'm going to get done today, and you stick it to your computer screen, and that's your action plan. That's fine. Or it might be a 5-year plan in your company that's very complex and it takes you 12 months to develop that plan and then to deliver it and get it out there in front of everybody. And then you have to implement it. That might be your action plan. But regardless, there always needs to be a plan. As the saying goes, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. There needs to be some sort of plan, even if it's a really simple one. It could even just be in your mind. It might just be, you know what? I need to say such and such to so and so. And my plan is I'm going to walk over there right now and I'm going to say that to them. That's a plan too. But we just need to have some sort of plan to execute. Otherwise, it doesn't get done. And then we don't have the influence we want.
Wow, there's been a lot covered in this interview so far. As a marketing leader, we know you like to spend more time taking action and less time taking notes. So we've got you covered. We packaged up all the tips, strategies, and resources from each episode into some beautifully crafted notes just for you. Not ugly AI-generated transcripts, but real notes taken by a real person on our team. To grab the notes, head on over to growthgenerators.io, look out for this podcast episode, and download the notes. But be quick, they're only live for a few weeks after the episode airs. Now, back to the show.
So it can be as simple or complicated as you need, but I guess it's about the simple steps and the 1%ers and continuing to take action. Is that what works best?
Yeah, and the way I organize my things is I do journaling. And so often in my journal, I'll say, hey, I've got 3 things I need to get done today. What are those big 3 things that I need to get done today? I write them in my journal. I leave my journal on my desk there, and then I check them off as I get the big things done. I also have a whiteboard that's in front of me, and I've got some longer term plans there. I like to use, going back to Covey again, he talked about big rocks, and he had this object lesson he did where he had this jar and he's got a bunch of big rocks and then medium-sized rocks and then pebbles and then sand. And he has somebody try to put all the small stuff in the sand, the pebbles, the other rocks first, and then fit in the big rocks. And you can't do it. You can't fit them in the jar. And it doesn't seem like you can fit everything. I mean, it seems like it would be impossible to fit everything in the jar. But if you put in the big rocks first, and then the medium size, and then the pebbles, and then the sand, you can fit it all into the jar. The lesson being, do the big stuff first. And so I like to go through a big rocks planning process, and I take the big things that I want to do, and then I break them down into smaller and smaller chunks, and I get all the way down to where I can say, what is the one thing that I need to do right now to make progress towards getting one of these big rocks done? And that's how I like to plan things out for the long term, to make sure that I actually get the big things done that I really care about. Otherwise, it's really easy for a year or two to go by and you say, I know I've been busy, but what did I actually get done? It's kind of hard to tell. But if you get those big rocks done, you know what you got done because it was a really big thing.
Yeah. Use a similar approach, actually. I've got a whiteboard there with the higher level strategy, and then I use some journaling and paper, and then I use Monday and the diary. I found actually time blocking works quite well in the calendar as well. And I think especially for CMOs, like their diary is often back to back to back. So if you don't put in the time to work on your influence strategy or put in that team planning session or that important meeting with the CFO or the CEO, if you're not planning ahead and blocking out that time before someone else feels it, then other priorities will emerge. So I think it's just taking that action to put time in your diary to create this influence, whether it's externally or internally, whatever the content and message is, but making that time I think is critical.
I think one of the most important things about action is to keep that plan simple, to keep your organization simple. It's easy for a lot of us to get buried under planning the plan and setting up the system of how things are going to get done, because that feels productive. And yet we're not really doing anything. And we might be creating a system that's so complicated, nobody will actually use it. And it's okay to get a piece of paper or a Google Doc and just create a simple plan in there and say, here's our plan. This is what we're doing for the next month. It's all in this Google Doc on one page. We don't have to set up Trello and CRMs and all these complicated systems to get things done. There are sometimes really simple ways to get something done more effectively, but we seem to trap ourselves in technology and think, hey, this is cool technology, I've got to use it. But
Yeah.
a lot of that stuff gets in our way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think simplification is critical. Even if you can get it down to a plan on a page that you can print out and keep as a reference point and make sure you're ticking boxes, can be powerful. So system 6 then, collaborations. We've gone through vision, genius zone, audience, content, action, and now we're up to collaboration. And I like the question in this phase, who will I work with that will 1000x my impact? So what do you mean by this?
So collaboration is all about amplification. It's about getting more done. You can have influence with just the first 5 systems, but your influence is going to be limited. If you can enroll other people and work together with others, then your influence becomes unlimited. If you think about anybody who has been hugely influential, all of these people had collaborators. They had people they were working with. And as soon as I say this, people's minds are saying, well, I know somebody who was kind of a lone wolf and they were really influential. So that's true. But even these people had collaborators. One example is Harper Lee, who wrote To Kill a Mockingbird. And we think, well, there's the ultimate example of one person having a huge impact. But even in the case of Harper Lee, that book never would have existed except that she had collaborators. One of her collaborators was Truman Capote, another famous author. And he was a friend of hers when they were both young and they talked a lot, and his ideas influenced her ideas. The main collaborators she had 2 friends, a couple, who came to her one Christmas and they said, hey, Harper, we know you've got a great book inside of you. We also know that you're really busy with your full-time job. We saved up a year's worth of your salary and we're giving it to you as a present. We want you to take a year off and write your book, whatever that book is. And so Harper quit her job and she wrote To Kill a Mockingbird. And now it's one of the most influential books of all time. But she didn't do it alone. She had other people who were helping her. And of course, in a corporate environment, we're all working on teams. We all have other people we're working with, and that's collaboration too. But if we look externally, it does go to this question of what other companies can I work with? Do I have a competitor who maybe I can actually work together with and we can both come out of this ahead? Are there strategic partnerships out there where we can amplify our voice or our vision to get more done? And so you look at, well, who's targeting the same group that I'm targeting, but we're not trying to kill each other. We're not competing head to head with each other. Can we work together? And so you see this a lot today with collaborations between different types of companies. So for example, Nike does a lot of collaborations with other companies where they'll produce limited edition sneakers with some other companies' branding incorporated into that sneakers. They just did it with Ben & Jerry's not too long ago, where you could buy these special flavored dunks and you can get the ice cream that matches the shoes and things like that. So there are all sorts of collaborations out there where both parties win by targeting the same audience together rather than separately. And that's how we can get a lot of influence. You see how YouTubers actually do this really well, where one YouTuber will say, hey, I've got 1 million subscribers. There's this other YouTuber who has 1 million subscribers. Let's do a collaboration. Let's make a video together and we'll put it on both channels. And now we're cross-pollinating. And so both channels end up with 2 million followers instead of just 1 million. Everybody wins out of that type of collaboration, but there are lots of those opportunities in the corporate environment.
Absolutely. And I think over here in Australia, CMO Australia has done a series recently on these brand partnerships, and there were some interesting ones between Uber and Pet Barn during lockdown, where you could kind of get pet food delivered, and Binge TV and The Iconic, so kind of like, a streaming service and a clothing brand were launched an inactive wear range for all the people that were sitting at home watching TV and not being as active. So some classic examples there. And I think from a CMO perspective, if they're trying to build their external audience, then it might be, well, if they want to build their brand to either help attract talent or to build their career, it's what podcasts can I go on? What speaking activities can I look at where I might be on a panel with other influencers and I can get the benefit of that and reach an audience that I may want to reach? So definitely ways they can apply it there. So system 7, the last one, is love. And this talks about excitement, empathy, goodwill, and kindness. So tell me why these are all important.
This was the hardest system to come up with when I was formulating this. I was thinking about this for years and I kept thinking, are there 5 systems? Are there 6? Are there 7? Of course, 7's kind of a nice number, right? It just sounds better. But I also knew that there was something missing when I just had 6 systems. And I thought there's something out there. It's attitude or mindset or something. And finally, this word love came up and I said, that's it. That's the 7th system. You've got to have the love for your customers, for your content, for your product, for your company. And this is that excitement, that passion. If you don't have that, people sense it and they're not going to follow you. They're not going to be influenced by you. They're not going to do what you want them to do if you're not excited about it yourself, if you're not passionate about it yourself. All the great leaders throughout history have been really excited, really into what they're doing. It's not just going through the motions. People sense that and then they buy in and they trust you because they know that you're taking them somewhere that matters to you. And when we lose that love or that passion, or really the words that I think are the most key for explaining what love is goodwill. When we have goodwill for somebody and they sense that we care about them and what matters to them, when they sense that, then they're going to trust us and they feel like, hey, this person's got my back. They're trying to take me somewhere good. And that's when they're really willing to trust, which is really about surrendering and letting go and letting somebody guide you. So if you think about customers, they don't have time to fully understand the products and services that they're buying. It's an act of faith. It's an act of trust. If they feel that goodwill coming from you, then they'll trust you. If they feel like, oh, they're just doing this because they want to make money, it's just a transaction, they're going to sense that too. And they're going to say, well, I don't know if this product's really going to help me. I don't know if it's really going to do what I need it to do, because how can I trust this person? They're just in it for the money. They're just trying to get the sale. But as soon as the goodwill is there, as soon as they feel that, then they feel like, hey, I can trust this person. They're more likely to make that purchase. So when it comes to talking about going back to branding and attracting our audiences through branding, one of the key components of branding has to be this sense of goodwill. If we cannot make that part of our brand, then we're just a commodity and people might as well go to any other company that has the same offering. But if we have the love in there, then people will beat a path to our door.
Yeah. Yeah. It reminds me of Jay Baer talked about utility and being useful back in his book many years ago. There's obviously a lot of for-purpose brands which are genuinely about creating, making the world a better place. Can it be harder for some organizations that are more product is perhaps less lends itself towards love? And how do you get away from just trying to spin a story and being creating that authentic goodwill?
We look at businesses that are more commoditized, and it's harder to differentiate a commoditized product, right? Think about, so we've done a lot of work with self-storage facilities, and that's kind of one of the ultimate commoditized products. I mean, it's a building that's shaped like a box that has box-like rooms, and then you fill those rooms with boxes. I mean, it's a kind of a boring business. And everybody just goes to the self-storage facility that's closest to them. It's highly geographic in terms of why people buy self-storage. So how do you bring the love into that type of business? Well, there are lots of opportunities to add ancillary services and to do things that are helpful to people and to be kind to people in the interactions. There's customer service opportunities. There's the person who forgets to pay their bill, and so they get the late fee, and then they say, but I just forgot, or I switched credit cards or something. And how you take care of the customer in that situation determines how they feel about your brand. And if you come through as, oh, you know what, we're sorry, yeah, this happens all the time, and you're willing to help them out and waive that fee, and you're kind throughout that process, or your people are kind throughout that process, then they feel like, hey, this company's got my back. They're nice to deal with. They're reasonable. And that goodwill can show through. Braintree is a credit card processing company a lot of people are familiar with. They were acquired by PayPal a few years ago. And I once called up this company because we were using their services and I had a customer support issue that I needed to get resolved. And I thought, okay, I'm going to call this company. I'm going to get the phone tree. I'm going to have to go through a bunch of options. I'm going to be on hold for about 10 or 15 minutes. And then I'm going to get a support rep that is hard for me to communicate with because their native language isn't my native language. And they're getting paid $3 an hour. And so they're not really qualified to answer my question. I'll have to get it escalated. So I'm already prepared for a half-hour call just to get to the person that I need to talk to. And instead, I called their number and somebody said, Braintree, this is Allison. How can I help you? And I thought, what
Yeah.
is, wait, this is how I reacted too on the phone. I was like, what?
Where's the hold music?
And I said, is this a live person? She said, yeah. How can I help you? And I said, wow, you caught me off guard there. She's like, yeah, that happens to pretty much everybody. And she helped me. She never transferred me. She was able to solve my problem in about 3 minutes. And I thought, that's incredible. I've never had a customer service experience like this. But they took the time and paid the money, made the investment to make sure that somebody would answer that phone immediately, no phone tree, instant help. And here I am, I'm telling this story years later because it was such a unique experience. But to me, that's an example of somebody at the top of that company saying, we are going to love our customers and we are going to push this down all the way through to frontline customer support. And we're going to look at this process from a customer-centric viewpoint and say, what does the customer want? And we're going to give it to them because we genuinely care about them. That was the feeling I got. And a lot of other companies do this great. I mean, Starbucks is actually pretty good at this, amazingly, given the scale of their company. Zappos, which was acquired by Amazon, was famous for this, for doing outrageous things in terms of customer service. And I actually tested them out with that once too. And yes, I got amazing customer service through them. But there are a lot of companies getting this right, but there are a lot of companies that aren't doing it, which means if you do it first in your industry or you do it best in your industry, this is where you can develop a real advantage, even if your product is highly commoditized.
Yeah. Makes sense. It's looking at those moments that are typically moments of friction and turning them into that moment of magic. And I think, again, coming back to the internal perspective for a CMO, you can't do anything without trust and goodwill with either your staff or internal stakeholders. So it's really thinking about, how do you build that trust? And that sometimes just spending the time. So it's working out, coming back to who your audience is, how do you make time to build relationships with them that go deeper than just transactional, can you do this for me, can you do this for me, and you actually build relationships so that when the time comes you may need something, or you've got a difficult conversation, or there's a matter that needs dealing with, it's a bit of conflict, you've got that base of trust because you've been generous, you've been genuine, you've put effort into building that relationship. It's what creates goodwill. And I guess from a leadership perspective, it's being that servant leader that's there to build the capability of your staff and give them opportunities and care about where they want to go, not just being a command and control kind of leader. Anything you want to add to that?
I'm throwing out a lot of Covey quotes today, but when it comes to these relationships, Covey said, fast is slow and slow is fast. You can't develop high quality relationships without taking the time and making the investment. And most companies aren't doing that, which again gives us the opportunity to get an advantage by doing it the right way, going slow so that we can move fast in the long run.
Yeah, absolutely. Fantastic, Josh. So we covered the 7 systems. So just recapping, system 1 was vision, system 2, genius zone, system 3 was audience, system 4, content, system 5, action, system 6, collaboration, and system 7, love. So the audience now has an overview of this model. There's 7 systems and what each of those entails, but where do you recommend they start if they want to actually apply this to start building their influence? What's a good starting point for them?
Well, everything starts with vision, but these steps are not steps, they're systems. And the difference between steps and systems is that you take steps one at a time to get to a destination. Systems need to all be running well for you to move or to get the job done that you want to get done. So I liken the 7 systems to a car. You've got a driving system or a steering system. You've got a navigation system, you've got a comfort system, your air conditioner, you've got your propulsion system. So you have all these different systems, And if they all work well and they work well together, then you can get from point A to point B. If one of those systems is weak or not functioning properly, it can impact all the other systems. It might even make all the other systems not work. That's one reason why System 7 Love is so important. If you've got the love, you can do everything else wrong and you can still have influence with people, because people say, hey, they mean well. He means well, she means well, and then they can still trust you. However, if you don't have the love, you can be doing everything else right and people won't trust you, and therefore you don't have the influence. So the key is not to look at it as I'm going to go through these steps A to Z and then everything's going to work out. It's I'm going to go through these systems and I'm going to make sure that each one of these systems is working well for me. And when I find a problem, I'm going to fix that problem and bring that system up to where it needs to be. And I'm going to measure all 7 systems on an ongoing basis, because I know that only when they're all working well and working well together am I going to have the full potential of my influence out there, making the impact I want to make.
Fantastic, Josh. Well, thank you so much for sharing those systems. And before we go at the end, I'll make sure we point people to find out more about yourself and how they can learn more about this. But before we get to that, what are you most excited about in the future? Or what are you working on next?
I'm working on too many things. I'm a scattered ADHD entrepreneur. Yeah. But right now I've got my marketing agency, which my partners run. I'm running a company or a service called Published Author, where I help entrepreneurs and executives to write books that will help them in their careers or help them to grow their businesses. And I do a bunch of speaking and such. I'm also doing research with some academics on the state of entrepreneurship and the intersection between entrepreneurship and government policy. So I work with a professor at the Harvard School of Business and working on some case studies there. So lots of things going on, lots of things I'm passionate about. And I think I'm still searching for my own genius zone, to be honest.
Yeah. Well, sounds exciting. A lot to keep you busy. And I think you're a dad as well. So no doubt there's never a spare moment. But yeah, sounds like a lot of things you're passionate about, and I'll stay tuned to hear more about all of that. Now, it's time for our Fast Five. Are you ready?
I'm ready. Let's do it.
Okay. So what do you believe are 3 essential capabilities or criteria of a high-performance marketing team?
One is the ability to move fast, because speed trumps so many things. Another one is basic competence. It's amazing how hard it is to find just competent people who can get the job done, let alone get it done really well, but just get it done. And then the third thing is empathy for the customer, for the people that you're selling to. Without empathy, it's really hard to meet their needs.
Absolutely. And how would you describe your team's culture in one word?
Caring.
Yeah, love box ticked in terms of the love system. And what is one metric that you've successfully used to track and measure team performance?
I guess I would say happiness, really, because if our customers are happy and if the team's happy, then everything's going well and everybody's happy. So it's that happiness. There are lots of ways to define happiness, but generally happiness, if everybody's happy, everything's good.
Yeah, I like that. It hasn't come up yet, but it's, it rings home. Is that kind of an informal measure, or have you actually found a way to measure it?
I think it is. I think it's easy to get trapped in formal measurements sometimes. And we're small enough. All of my businesses are small enough that we can keep in touch with people and we kind of know whether people are happy or not. If they're not happy, they complain. And so if we're getting complaints, then we know, okay, there's something that we need to fix, and we fix that. I really like the way that Basecamp, which is a popular project management tool, the way that they do their bug requests and adding features to their product, which is they get all sorts of complaints and input from their customers, and then they delete them and they don't track them. They don't keep them in a database. And their logic is, if something keeps on coming up all the time, we're just going to know about it. It's going to be top of mind for us. And we're going to know that is something we need to add because it's always coming up. And if it's just one person complaining, then they'll complain and that thing disappears and that doesn't get added to the product. And that's kind of how we run our companies is If something keeps coming up, we fix it. Or if it's obvious that it needs to be fixed, we fix it. But if it's just a one-time complaint, maybe that doesn't really need to be fixed. Maybe it can be handled some other way.
Yeah, makes sense. And what is one skill or capability you've learned recently that you wish you'd developed much sooner in your career?
Really, the ability to, I don't know if it's an ability, but it's more of an observation that I'm good at certain things and I'm not good at other things. It's hard to admit to oneself that you're not good at something, especially when it's something that you want to be good at. And I've learned about myself over the past few years that I'm not really that good at running businesses. I'm good at starting businesses. I'm good at marketing and branding and a lot of things that are important, especially at the beginning. And I'm good at setting up systems, but I'm not that good at running the business once it settles into kind of a pattern. And that was hard for me to come to terms with. Now that I've come to terms with it, I just know when I start a business, I need to find somebody who's really good at operations and running that business. And I need to get them involved as quickly as possible and hand things off to them as quickly as possible. Richard Koch, he's the author of the 80-20 principle. And what he says is find what you're exceptional at and do only that thing. And again, that's hard because we all want to be good at a lot of things, but finding what you're exceptional at, which goes back to the genius zone, and then only doing that thing and finding other people to do everything else, that really is the key to success professionally.
Yeah. I think even, thinking of teams, often performance plans are looking at weaknesses and how they can be overcome, whereas it should be about strengths and how do you fully optimize the strengths of your team and build on those, or given at least equal prominence, I believe. And lastly, what book or books have you read that you found yourself recommending to others or that you think our audience would gain value from?
This is the hardest question. This is like asking me who my favorite child is, except
Yeah.
when it comes to books, I've got 100 of them
Yeah.
and I want to recommend them all.
Yeah.
Well, I've already mentioned 7 Habits of Highly Effective People and Hook Point and the 80-20 principle. This book here that I'm just getting started on is another great one by Derral. It's called The YouTube Formula. And this is the guy who advises Mr. Beast, and anybody who's on YouTube probably knows who Mr. Beast is. And if you don't, go look him up because he's pretty entertaining and he's the #1 YouTuber right now. So he's tapped into something that matters about marketing out there. Some of the other foundational books that have been really helpful for me, another one is The Speed of Trust, which is by Stephen R. Covey's son. I can't remember his exact name, if it's Sean Covey or John Covey, but
yeah. I think it's even a similar, might even be Stephen as well. I think it was.
Yeah, it might be Stephen MR. There are so many Coveys who have done so many things, but The Speed of Trust is a fantastic book. And I could go on and on and on, but I'll leave it there.
Fantastic. Well, we put all those in the show notes for the listeners if they want to look at them up. Well, Josh, thanks again so much. Brilliant to quickly touch on your own book, CMOs at Work. So we'll also add that to the show notes. And then to go through the 7 systems, I think it'll be incredibly useful for our audience, either looking to build their external influence so that they can attract better talent, they can continue in their career, or even just to think about how they can apply it to build influence within the organization, which is critical as a CMO with so many stakeholders to influence. So thank you for sharing that with us. Before you go, where can we send people who want to find out more about yourself or how they can build their influence, get a copy of your book, learn about your agencies?
Best place is my website, Josh Steimle. That's JoshStei, M as in Mary, LEE.com.
Yeah. Perfect. Well, once again, Josh, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Ty. It's been a pleasure talking with you today.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of Lean Mean Marketing Teams, brought to you by Growth Generators. To say thanks, we've packaged up all those tips, strategies, and resources into some beautifully crafted notes just for you, so you can spend more time taking action and less time taking notes. To grab the notes, head on over to growthgenerators.io, look out for this podcast episode and download the notes. But be quick, they're only live for a few weeks after the episode airs.